Good day, everyone. I am the director of Yeşil Büyüme Sustainability Training and Consultancy Services. I am İlyas Gülenç. Uh, Today, we will going to talk about corporate sustainability reporting directive and corporate sustainability due diligence with Amanda Simonsen. Uh, she is a leading voices on LinkedIn about ECG and sustainability. Uh, Hello, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for
Hello.
accepting our invitation.
Hello. Yeah,
Uh,
thank you so much.
Thank you. As you know, ECG and corporate sustainability have become buzzwords in global business landscape. As the negative impact of climate change is getting more conspicuous. Corporate sustainability reporting, the directive entered into force in the European Union at the beginning of this year, and corporate sustainability due diligence advances through in trialogue process in the European Union. And without further ado, I want to give the floor to Amanda. Amanda, first of all, I want you to introduce yourself to our audience. Actually, I am really wondering why did you choose a sustainability career after having a bachelor degree in sociology? Then we can delve into the questions.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm sorry about there was a bit noise. But yeah, just to do a short introduction on that, which is also an interesting question. Thank you. Basically, when I was educating as a sociologist, I had a job within the Danish lobby sector, meaning that I was doing a lot of lobbying and politics within the real estate and buildings and infrastructure sector. So I had to stay in front of the media all the time to inform our clients on the political environment and the regulatory environment, of course, as well. And I kept reading about ESG and compliance and EU regulation, meaning that I was super interested, or I became super interested in EU regulation, how the political environment it was changing, and how much this new piece of regulation would impact not only European countries and Danish companies, but also global companies, especially ones that are supplying multinational entities. So I started to dig deeper into this agenda, and I found that I had to do some more courses on climate law. So I started studying climate law and also ESG investing and financial planning and business administration. So I tried to like get a holistic view on the coming and changing environment, especially within ESG and compliance for the new regulatory environment. So by that, I changed also my career path into assurance of non-financial numbers. And here I found that the data and the reliance on data, the transparency in data is super important to meet the demand from EU, but also to like basically meet the intention from EU, which is basically making world a better place to stay. So yeah, that was my entering into like this agenda and this ESG formalized world. Now I am a ESG manager, so we are helping clients with complying to the new regulation from the EU, especially within the CSRD, but we're also helping clients with complying to the criteria under the EU taxonomy for sustainable business activities, and also informing on the CSDD.
Perfect, perfect. You have more than 8,000 followers on LinkedIn, and the quality of your content is very high, very informative. And thank you for posting. I want to ask my first question. Uh, what are the major shifts in European sustainability landscape in the European Union? Especially, you can mention about European Union taxonomy, CSRD, CSDD. Similar regulation are also on the way in Turkey. What do you want to say about these issues?
Yeah, so basically, to start with the full overview, EU launched the Sustainable Finance Package, which is under the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal aligns with the intentions of the Paris Agreement. So what's happening now when intentions are becoming law and regulation? It will demand a huge effort for global companies, for small, medium-sized entities, as well as non-European companies. So what's happening now? So the significant changes is the scope of reporting. And the scope of reporting will demand reporting across the value chain. And what does that mean? It means that companies that are to comply with the new regulations, they will send data demands and requests throughout the supply chain because they need data to disclose. And that's not only large companies, it will also be banks, for instance, also investors, so they can disclose on their portfolios. And that will also be a huge shift in how we allocate capital and how we allocate capital within sustainable activities and non-sustainable activities. And if you look at the picture here, we see that the EU taxonomy is basically this classification of what is a sustainable activity and what is not a sustainable activity. And the taxonomy is basically defining those activities. So when a lender or a bank or an investor are to look at a company, for example, then they can basically have a quick look and a quick overview of how much of the CapEx, OpEx, and revenue are placed in these sustainable activities. And then they can allocate their capital for the sustainable investments, and they can allocate in, for example, companies that are within the fossil fuel sector, and then they can use the data as better informed fundamentals of decision making. So it's not about ethically going in saying this is good, this is bad, but it's more informative about how do we define sustainable investments. And then investors, they can decide whether they want to invest in sustainable activities or not. So, and yeah, under the taxonomy, there will be a lot of criteria on defining the activity and also in defining how the activity is not contributing to environmental goals under the Paris Agreement. In the EU taxonomy, there is also due diligence on the minimum social safeguards. So the activity should also be aware of or indicated under the human rights and also complying to the ILO and the UN guiding principles within human rights. So when defining this classification, you need, of course, some disclosures. And here we, as I mentioned, also the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is the regulation that are demanding investors and banks to disclose their portfolios. It will make it more transparent in the activities and also the investments in these activities. So it will not only be measured on the return on investment, the economic return on investment, but it will also be measured on various else factors. And then the third part here will be the toolbox, which is these screening criteria, for example. So the market participants, they can actually also have this toolbox to look at what's green, what's not green. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. It's a comprehensive system, and Turkey is also preparing for establishing a national taxonomy. I think a national taxonomy is at the heart of this system. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
and
If there's no taxonomy, it can be hard to interact.
with other regulations.
Mm.
Okay, perfect. Uh, Can you give more information about the relationship between CSRD taxonomy and CSDD? Briefly, can you explain this relationship between them?
Yeah, of course. As mentioned right before, the taxonomy is this classification of what's sustainable, what's not sustainable, and how much of the portfolio or how much of the investments, capital allocation are actually within sustainable activities. Then there is the CSRD, which is basically a reporting of sustainable behavior or just behavior in general, demanding entities to comply on various specific topics that they find material within environment, social, and governance. And the CSDDD, which is also right now in the European Parliament in a discussion on the more formal structures of it, so it's not complete yet, is how to create due diligence processes, establishing systems, and of course, taking care of human rights across the value chain. And the reason why I said due diligence in the middle of this is basically that this is a system, this is establishing systems. It's not about disclosing, it's not about defining, it is about establishing new systems within how we conduct business and how we understand business, and especially how we understand sustainable activities.
Okay, Turkey has a strong trade relationship with European Union, and I think Turkish companies should be aware of this system to protect their competitive advantages in the value chain. Second question, can you explain the scope and impacts of CSRD in the perspective of companies in the supply chains, as for example, companies in Turkey?
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of pressure on the data side, meaning that when a company has to disclose on their value chain, including their suppliers, for example, on their scope 1, 2, and 3 and their emissions, they will send data demands. There was a data demand throughout the value chain. And meaning that even though companies are not directly included in the reporting and in the regulation as such, they will be indirectly hit. So the timeline of this is basically on a short. Already by now, we are looking into a reporting year starting with the largest companies in 2024, and they are to report 2025. So suppliers, they are already now, they have to deliver a lot of data on their employees, on their emissions, on their governance structure, and even on the product level, which might be also very important to conduct those life cycle analysis. If you are textile, if you are producing products within food and beverages, you have to like inform the product much more with much more comprehensive data. And especially there is a pressure on the carbon accounting part, which will be one of the strongest demands that will be sent from reporting entities. That will be the demand of how their scope 3 is made. And their scope 3 is including all of the suppliers' emissions. And then on the product side, there will be a lot of demands on how to comply to the transparency of these products as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and this
Please
is
go on. Okay.
yeah, sorry.
Please go on.
Yeah, this
Amanda.
is just the timeline on the how the regulation will be more and more including in terms of smaller companies. And we will see the following years that there will be a lot of data inflows and outflows between companies, which will be very important to stay competitive. So if you want to be competitive, you need to deliver the data that are asked for. Already by now, we see in the building and infrastructure sector, but also in big pharma, that if you cannot comply to the demand, or if you cannot supply with data, you will actually lack competitiveness. So it's super important to like stay in front of the data demand, because the regulatory environment will only be like more hard once we get like into like 2025, 2026, for instance. Because then the smaller entities, they need to disclose on their emissions, for example, or their sustainability factors as well. So if companies can coin the resource used on, for example, capturing or getting all the data from their plants, for example, then they can basically get the return on that investment later on, because it will be a demand. It will be a huge demand for data.
Thank you very much. The data set in CSRD, European Sustainability Reporting Standard, is very challenging for companies outside the Europe. I think it's also challenging for companies in Europe. And as you said, we should expect a tsunami of data from companies to companies. And this information will influence the decision-making process of big companies in Europe in terms of inclusion partners in their supply chain. In this regard, um, uh, how do your company help your clients to comply with obligation under the CSRD, and what are your recommendations for companies in Turkey?
Yeah, first of all, we are helping the clients to get an overview of the maturity. So how mature are they? And a lot of them, they basically need a lot of help to establish new mechanisms, new systems, how to capture the emissions. So there's a lot of work to do, both organizationally, but also in terms of the business model, their systems, and the whole governance of the company. Sometimes also how to like upskill employees, it will be necessary. And then we help companies with getting an overview of their impacts. We are helping companies a lot with like, okay, how to understand impact, how to understand the value chain, what is the value chain and how does it differ from the actual supply chain. it is not the same. The value chain will encapsulate a lot more information and look at various different topics, because supplier will all, in most cases, look at time, material, pricing, quality, and the risks associated with that, while a value chain analysis will look much broader, for example, on biodiversity, the risk associated to biodiversity, looking at how local communities are affected by the business activities, and so on and so on. So yeah, we help the companies with the understanding their materialities, and this slide also shows that the process around having these discussions on double materialities are actually quite difficult, because this is also processes. It can be hard to figure out what is material, because the material topics are going into the final report. But material topics might have to change. If you are commissioning a new plant, or if you are opening a new office, then you might have to reassess the risks associated with that. The war between Ukraine and Russia really had a big impact on how companies, they assessed their material impacts. So it can also be like macro environment, it can be conjunctions. For example, inflation might have a say here as well. So basically, we help the companies to understand the context, the value chain, and how to define all stakeholders, not only shareholders, but also stakeholders in terms of employees, local societies, biodiversity, also but a silent one, which was also might be, for example, in the agricultural sector, a dependency. So it's how to understand the whole environment and the context of the company. And then we identify the impacts with this list, where there is a sustainability matters, and then there is these impacts, risk, and opportunity, which is also demanded in the CSRD to report on. And then we get the final list, and the final list will be the reporting topics. And then there is the reporting process.
Okay. Okay, it's a complicated flow chart for companies who are not familiar with ESG reporting, and I think identifying risks and opportunities is crucial for companies to manage those risks. And companies in the European Union wants their partners in their value chain to manage those risks and opportunities properly. Uh, in this regard, uh, you can mention briefly about issues that companies have to report under the European Sustainability Reporting Directive, and its impact on suppliers. Maybe they are not in the scope of CSRD. As you said, they will be affected indirectly. Uh, uh, what do you want to say about this issue?
Yeah, and I want to highlight the bottom of it. There is some changes in the scope of reporting, in the context of the reporting, the way it's channeled will be different from what we've seen so far, and then the responsibility of the reporting will change as well. But it's important to notice the bottom of the slide here, that the reporting and the due diligence and the system will be based on the business model and the whole value chain. So what we look at here is basically that the own operation will be the business activity, the part that the business and the company has responsibility of. That has been the financial reporting so far. And when we then look at the upstream and the downstream, meaning the full value chain, it will include information and data from both sides of the own operation. And in the downstream, we also see the supply side. So when a company has to disclose on the full value chain, we will see a lot of demand for data in the upstream. And then we'll see a feedback loop from the downstream, more or less, as the regulation will take care of the full environment, looking at the downstream, how is it affecting local communities, how is it the product or the service affecting customers and end users, how is it affecting biodiversity, for example. And this full value chain will basically be in the reporting of CSRD. In the upstream, there will be a component side, a geographical side that will be super important to take into the reporting for the companies that are to report, meaning that there will be sent a lot of requests down the supply chain to make sure that the company's reporting is comprehensive enough, that it's transparent enough, and that it is complete enough, in fact, of the business activity.
Yes, perfect. I think these slides elaborate on these issues. Companies in Turkey should be aware that they must enhance their sustainability performance on this issue, and they should take this issue very seriously to be safe in supply chains in coming years. Maybe you want to uh, briefly explain the importance of carbon accounting, life cycle assessment, and establishing systems for collecting data in this regard. Uh, do you want to say something about this issue?
Yeah, definitely. So when companies, large companies, they are to comply, and also it's very important to bear in mind that it will also be the financial sector, and the financial sector is basically the ones that are pushing very hard on this. It's not only the large entities, because the large entities do also have investors, but it will be how to mobilize capital into sustainable business activities. Okay, so how do you then prepare as a supplier for a company that are to disclose on this information throughout the CSRD? It will basically be starting generating data to meet the demands. It could be for the product side, looking at the life cycle analysis, life cycle assessments of your product. How do the product live up to European standards, for example? Does the company have any services, and what is the terms for conducting the service? Does the company have in their own value chain any vulnerable activities, any activities with a high risk, and how is that covered by the company? Then it is to establish the systems that captures risks and that are avoiding negative impacts, and then establishing policies to mitigate the risks, to avoid the risks, and to meet the code of conducts that will be sent from larger entities. So it's basically to focusing on these core business activities. How can we improve? How can we navigate our business activities into more transparent activities, more sustainable, defined, classified sustainable activities, to meet the demands from the bigger companies. And then finally, step one is to start the carbon accounting, set up systems. It will take years to capture especially the scope 3, but also to like have a system in place to like define what is our scope 1, what is our scope 2, and how do we get the data to disclose on this scope 1 and 2, right? because then you need to like get into your suppliers, getting your data, and then formalize the data so you can actually provide the larger and reporting entities with the data from your business activities. And finally, to follow the regulatory environment will be super needed, especially when you are not to disclose yet, but I hit indirectly. It's super important to be in front of the coming regulation to stay competitive and to follow the rules. It is resource demanding, but it will be a competitive advantage to do so. Yeah.
Perfect. You said managing the risk and mitigating risk in the value chain. Uh, uh, I think in this regard, I should ask the impact of corporate sustainability due diligence. Uh, it hasn't yet entered into force in the European Union, but I think it will support the enforcement of this corporate sustainability reporting directive and other regulations in sustainable framework of European Union. Uh, can you define the corporate sustainability due diligence directive and its potential impacts on supply chains?
Yeah, definitely. The due diligence directive is basically quite radical on human rights. It will demand companies to ensure due diligence within policy development and implementation. And it will have a special focus on impact identification. You see here on the slide, step number 2 is basically how to identify the impacts, and then on step 3 and 4, how to prevent and stop if negative impact occurs. So it's basically to mitigating and defining risks. Finally, to establish and monitor grievance mechanisms and science-based targets alignment, and then to report on this, making sure that it is efficient systems, the systems live up to targets and metrics. So due diligence will do a huge impact on how we report and establish systems, especially when looking at human rights and human rights in the value chain and in developing countries, especially.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Amanda, for thank you very much, Amanda, for the information that you give us. I think it's very valuable and very insightful. Uh, uh, uh, do you want to say last thing to our audience? We have more than 18,000 followers on LinkedIn. And do you have any message to our followers, Amanda? Final message.
No, I just want to say thank you. And if there is any questions, you can reach out to one of us, I guess, and then we can try to answer those incoming questions. But thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. To keep updated and informed, our audience can follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Uh, see you next time. Bye. Thank you very much, Amanda.